Three, two, one. Hi, this is William Ramsey. Welcome to William Ramsey Investigates. On tonight's show, I have a very special guest. She writes as El Coyote on her blog, Hoaxstead Research. It's hoaxsteadresearch.wordpress.com, where she's compiled a voluminous amount of case files and stories regarding this event that happened in 2014, surrounding really what it was the release of videos involving two young children, I believe they were 8 and 9 at the time, telling very lurid tales about satanic abuse that was happening in their hometown of Hampstead in the north of London in the UK. And in my community, at least the people who do a lot of research, this story really went white hot. Everybody was watching it, trying to ascertain what the truth of the matter was. And tonight we're going to talk with El Coyote. Her first name is Karen. Talk about this case and try to go in greater detail. I've done a lot of recent reading, and I've come to the conclusion that there's a lot more to the story than a mere lurid tales told by an 8 and 9-year-old. So, Karen, are you there?
Oh, yep, I'm here.
Okay, good.
Sorry.
That's okay. Thanks for agreeing to the interview. I appreciate it. So, maybe what we can do is talk a little bit about yourself and how you became interested in this topic, and then we can just go through the background of how this notion of the Hampstead Satanic cult kind of burned through the internet back in 2014.
Sure. Just briefly about myself. I'm a former social worker. I used to work with adult survivors of child sexual abuse. That was my primary focus. So I came into this knowing a fair bit about the effects and the prevalence of child sexual abuse and what a terrible thing it can be. And when I first became alerted to the hoax, what I later would learn was a hoax, basically my sister and I were middle-aged ladies and had started a blog together. And she lived in London at that time and had attended an art show. One of her friends had some pieces in that show. One of the pieces which did not actually belong to her friend, but which belonged to another artist, showed a baby suspended by its umbilical cord and crying. And it was knitted out of wire, which was kind of weird and kind of creepy, but also interesting. Not sure I'd want it in my living room, but anyway. So we didn't think about this too much. This was back in 2012. In 2015 rather, in February, we began to notice that particular post, which had sort of sunk without a trace as far as we knew, had suddenly begun receiving hundreds and thousands of hits, which was unprecedented for us. We were just a tiny little blog, with a tiny little niche audience of some friends. And all of a sudden, the thing blew up, and we had no idea why. So we went looking to find out who was looking at it, and came up with a couple of blog sites. One was the David Icke Forum, and the other was a blog called Anger Fan, which apparently is run by two ladies from the south of Scotland, but we didn't know that at the time. And we began to look into some of the things that these people seemed to believe, which included stuff like, the world being run by shape-shifting lizards and all sorts of things, which we at the time thought was hilarious. We had no idea that this world existed. It was just, what is this? This is crazy.
Right.
And so we probably ill-advisedly wrote a blog post called what was it? Thank you, reptilian overlords. That's what it was, in which we basically thanked them for the for all the extra hits on our blog, because it was a real ego booster. And that's when the death threats started, and we started getting death threats and phone calls and all sorts of things. So I became very interested in what exactly this was all about. And went and looked at some of the stuff that was coming out and looked at the videos and went, those kids weren't abused. Like children, I know what children look and sound like when they've been sexually abused, and that was not it. And so began looking into it more closely. And then in mid-March 2015, Mrs. Justice Poffley, the family court high court judge in London, released the her judgment, and it suddenly all became clear what had happened.
Gotcha.
And at that point, we began sort of meeting other people online who had come to the same conclusion that we had. And at some point, another person, not myself, started the blog and began, posting all sorts of stuff. They were feeling kind of burned out. She was, she had kind of, had her run with that after about 4 months, because she was posting something like, I don't know, 10 or 15 posts a day, which was just crazy, And so I took over, and that's how I sort of inherited the blog at that point.
Gotcha.
Yeah. So basically, it was a very strange kind of organic process, but it was an interesting trip. And since then, I've really honed some research skills. And the blog is a constant work in progress.
Yeah, you've done some recent posts. I mean, even though this kind of thing went really white hot back in early 2015, there's still stories and still ramifications and kind of effects of the original kind of claims are still kind of happening even to the present.
Yeah, exactly. Most recently was the trial of Sabine McNeil. It was a very big deal. It happened in November and December of 2018, and I attended that and took notes throughout, and basically, published, day-to-day coverage of the trial, which was very, very.
And that was in London, correct?
Yeah, that was in London. Yeah.
So maybe what we can do for the listeners that haven't heard of this, what's known as the Hampstead Satanic cult story, maybe we can go in detail. Really, the crux of it, or where the core was, these videos that were leaked online, and really people, including myself, really kind of. I think there were 16 in total. They were compiled together, and they were in regards to a court case involving some of these principals who I should probably mention. The one is Ella Gariva Draper. She is a Russian woman, and she was in a custody battle with her ex-husband.
About the husband's name, because it's under a court restriction. Sorry about that.
I apologize. I'll edit that out. I apologize.
No.
Well, let's not use any. Let's just use first. Are we allowed to use first names?
Can we call him just the dad or
dad.
the father?
Perfect.
Yeah.
The dad. I definitely do not want to step on any court rulings in the UK. I apologize.
Yeah.
But we're allowed to use her name, though, right?
Oh, yeah.
Okay, so her name's Ella. She had a relationship at that time back in 2014 with a guy by the name of Abraham Christie, also known as Mr. Hemp. And so these videos were taken, and my understanding is that they were leaked to the public by Sabine McNeil. Is that correct?
Yes, they were. Yeah.
So they were not even supposed to be public. I mean, to my knowledge, they were involving this court case, correct?
Well, yeah.
Okay.
They were supposed to have been made public, but not in the way that Sabine did it.
Gotcha. Okay.
Yeah.
So Sabine McNeil was somebody who was associated with Ella Draper, and there's other individuals who kind of came onto the story as well, which we can go into in detail. But the core of it was these videos featuring these young little boy and a little girl, 8 and 9 years old, talking very bizarre, lurid scenarios of satanic and sexual abuse that you can probably find a much more in-depth. I don't want to really go into great detail, but they're very lurid and somewhat fantastical. There's elements of them involving stories that, they were abused by 100 people. I think that's on the video, but that was really how the core story started, and it really started people getting very interested in this case.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. Yeah. What happened was that the mom and the dad, Ella and the father, had a very acrimonious breakup after the children were born, and in about 2013, so about September to November of 2013, Ella said that she wanted to move to France, and she wanted to take the children with her. The father knew that if she did that, he would never see them again, and so he took out a restraining order, basically an order that said that she couldn't do it. So fast forward a little bit to May 2014. The father has contact with the kids for the first time since last year, and that same month, Ella meets Abraham Christie.
Gotcha.
Now, Abraham has a criminal record, and it has a record of having abused his own children.
I think you said he had 30. Did he have 36 convictions?
Yes.
Yeah. So,
yes.
so see, a very lengthy criminal record.
Yeah, and he'd been involved in the criminal justice system since he was a child. Like he'd been in what they call a borstal, which is like a reform school, basically.
Gotcha.
So he had attacked his teenage son. He'd attacked his stepchildren, beaten them until they peed themselves, that kind of thing. So he got together with Ella, and at this point, Abe was marketing himself as a nutritional consultant. And he was trying to basically sell the joys of hemp because he thinks it's a magical cure-all. He actually has published things where he says that hemp extract can be used as a replacement for blood plasma.
Wow.
So I don't think that would work personally, but I'm just going to say I'm not going to be the one to volunteer.
I won't either.
Yeah. So in August 2014, Abe started calling his brother-in-law, whose name was Jean Clément, and he was a special constable with the Metropolitan Police in London. Now, a special constable is not not a standard employee. It's a voluntary position, and I believe they do get paid a stipend, but it's not, it's not a huge thing. They help out with the police, but. So Abe called this guy, and he said that he had information regarding child abuse, but he wasn't saying anything specific about it. He was just trying to sort of tell him that he had this. And Jean Clément said, "Well, do you have evidence?" And Abe said, "No, but I'll get some."
Gotcha.
So the next thing we find out is Abe comes back from Morocco, where he was calling from, brings the children with him to Jean Clément's house on the 4th of September 2014, and they do this long, involved audio recording, which Jean Clément recorded, and they talk about all sorts of just completely wild and wacky things about, eating babies and killing them, and how they've been sexually abused by everyone in their school and many people outside their school, and the whole thing. It's just they lay it out.
Right, and that audio is often not listened to people who are interested in the subject of Hampstead. It's a fairly detailed, long interview that is audio. You can find it online, but I think it's about 45 minutes in total. And
it's yeah.
Yeah, it's very long. So there's a lot of talking, but there's also, you can see Abraham Christie's talking with the kids and encourage them. I think there's one sequence, where he was having them chant, "Kill them, kill them, kill them," and
kill the baby, kill the baby. Yeah.
Right. So so you see this,
and then he says, I like how that sounds.
Right. So they're very odd, and also it's also interesting in that audio is where Ella Draper goes from this satanic abuse theme right into custody. So there's also this element where she's really focused on her ex-husband, and I think that audio is very important for people to listen to if they're interested in getting to the truth of what I believe is really happening in Hampstead. Also, when you mentioned, I think it was Miss Justice Poffley, she said in her opinion on March 19th that it's Jean Clement Yahiru, and she said, with great presence of mind, Mr. Yahiru recorded the conversations between himself, Mr. Christie, the children, and the mother on his mobile phone. So that's a very important piece of evidence, in my opinion.
Yeah. So, now, the sad thing about that was that the police actually put it away in a locker and didn't bring it back out until after the investigation, mainly because I think they didn't want to toxify the investigation. They wanted to come into it just asking the kids what had happened and letting the kids tell the story. However, what Mrs. Justice Poffley said, and I agree with her, is if they had heard the video during the investigation, things might have taken a very different turn. In other words, they might have arrested Abe and Ella right there on the spot.
Right, good point. Yeah. So they were coming into the investigation, and there were police involved in going to Ella's house and talking to the kids and trying to ascertain what the truth of the subject was. They actually went. There were accusations by the children of this cult being involved at a Christ church, if I remember, and so they actually visited the church. Mm-hmm. So they really were. I mean, according to the records, they're looking into these allegations with objectivity and really trying to figure out what's going on.
Yeah, no, they did investigate the church. They did question people. They basically, did a lot of stuff that it has been mainly dismissed by people who want to believe the hoax for whatever reason. And, so there was actually an investigation. It mainly focused on what the children were saying. And then they would go out and check to see if what they were saying could be verified. The one piece of evidence that I thought was interesting was that they took the children on a drive round to try to find their father's house, which they claimed they knew where it was. It later transpired, we only found out about 2 years after the story first came to light, that Abraham and Ella had taken the children out the night before to try and coach them.
Wow.
Yeah. Yeah, and in the taxi, Abe said to the driver, she's a baby killer. And then he said to the little girl, "What do you do after you kill babies?" And the girl replied, "I eat them." "And what do you do after you eat them?" "I drink their blood." "And what does your dad do to you?" "Sex." So he was making her go through this with the taxi driver. The taxi driver said the girl seemed really distressed and was crying. And so he called the police to say, "Look, I don't know what the hell's going on here, but you need to know about this."
Wow.
And
so that's another third-party objective witness to these strange things. So this Jean Clement saw that, the taxi driver, but on the opposite side, there's no real corroboration between the tales of Abraham Christie, Draper, and the children. There's nobody's ever said anything that, and you can see some of these other real child trafficking conspiracies like the Franklin cover-up, or even what's happening with Jeffrey Epstein, is there's multiple parties, multiple people who said they were victimized. But in this case, that's an important thing to note, is that there is not anybody other than the children making these allegations, or that made the allegations.
Yeah. The social services did actually go round. We heard during the trial that the social services went round to various households and spoke to the children there to make sure that they were okay, because they had to do that, right? And all of the children expressed complete outrage and distress that their friend had been saying this about them. Now, they wouldn't have understood, of course, that their friend, that the children had been, forced to say this stuff.
Right.
But so they couldn't understand why the two kids had turned on them. Right. And what was going on, and they said, "No, absolutely, we're not being abused." One of the children actually made a statement at the end of the trial. She not in person. She wrote something, and the judge read it aloud, discussing how it had affected her and how she was constantly afraid of Abraham Christie, and afraid that he was going to come and kill her.
Right, and there was elements you can see in the original videos that the children do have marks on their face. I think it was the young girl had like a mark.
Oh, very much.
Yeah, so there's not merely just emotional scarring or traumatization, but actual physical abuse. The children, I believe, said he would hit them with spoons, that there was water torture or something like that, where they would pour water on the children. So these were not these videos were made in a hyper coercive environment, in my opinion.
Yeah, they used to get them up out of bed in the middle of the night and interrupt their sleep to interrogate them. The children both talked about how Abe would hold his hands over his hands over their mouths so that they couldn't breathe. They threatened to bury the little girl alive in the desert if she didn't do what they said. They kicked her very, very hard as she said, in the front privates. And, she was in extreme pain. And various other things. Like, it was the litany of torture. It was the spoons, by the way, the mark on the little girl's chin actually comes from Abraham having heated the spoon on the stove and pressed it into her chin. That came out during the trial.
Wow, that's incredible. Also, the children had metabolites for THC, which means that he wasn't giving them just purely neutral hemp something. He was clearly, they were being subjected to some type of exposure to marijuana.
Yeah.
So that's also very inappropriate. And there were other statements by the kids that Ella Draper was less than a great mother. They were hungry at school, and there were other things like that. If my memory serves me about the thing. So there was a lot of problems going with that. And what's interesting in their accusations too is that the supposed cult, also involved social workers and Kafkas. So it's almost like there was this roll call from Ella's mind of people that she was having trouble with, who just also so happened to be in a very broad-based satanic cult.
That's right, yeah. They threw in pretty much everyone that they'd ever had a beef with in Hampstead.
Right. What's Kafkas for the American audience? It is like a social worker group, right?
It's an organization that deals, you know what, I actually can't remember what the acronym stands for, but it is an organization that helps to determine what happens with kids during acrimonious split-ups between couples.
Oh, interesting. Yeah, so they were together for 3 years, Draper and the dad, and then things went south. And there was also this achieving best evidence. There were officers who interviewed the children and also the mother as well.
That's right.
And I think it was interesting because one of the officers, so this is another party, so these are like, there's a judge, there's all these people who are having the taxi driver, Jean Clement, but these officers, Martin and Fernandez, said, Draper told him a great deal about the abuse, but there were no tears at all. There was, he said, a distinct lack of emotion. It was just like she learned this. It was quite strange, is what one of the officers said.
Yes, yeah, that's right. That came out in the trial as well. The thing is, what happened was that after the videos were leaked, I think people began to, first of all, they believed everything. But then the judge put out her statement, and following that, I think basically in an effort to have people continue to believe them, they began kind of throwing out pieces of police evidence that had come to Ella, that she would have received those as part of, there are details in here that I'm neglecting. One is that she fired her lawyers multiple times. So I think it was the third time that she fired this one firm of solicitors. They basically handed her all of her paperwork and said, "Oh, fine, you deal with it. We're out of here," which is inappropriate because it wound up giving her all of the police documents and everything that had occurred. And what it meant was that she had access to material that ought not to have been put out into the public sphere, which she then shared with Sabine McNeil, and Sabine McNeil put out.
I see. And she was, I think in this last court hearing that involved Paul, she was absent from court, correct? So she didn't even show up to defend herself.
She'd already taken off for Spain by then. Yeah, she'd run out. What happened was that the police showed up at their door to talk to them about having released the videos, because that's kind of a no-no. Children, the basic bottom line about the videos is children, in any case, I'm sure it's the same in the United States as it is here, they are meant to have anonymity within the judicial system, because they're children and they don't have the capacity to cope with giving permission to have their images shown or whatever. So when they started doing this, when they started putting out the videos, the police rather came to visit Ella, and they also went to visit Sabine. both of them had received advance notice that this was going to happen, and they they basically fled. Sabine ran off to Germany, and Ella ran to Spain.
Like they literally jumped out of a window, according to...
They literally did,
Yeah.
yes.
I think there's actually audio somewhere around there, if my memory serves me correct. There's audio of the whole thing where they're like jumping out the window. It's crazy. Yep. How did Sabine McNeil become involved in this whole situation?
It's interesting. Sabine McNeil has been involved in a number of very dodgy cases in the past. Mainly cases about child custody and child access. This was going to be her big one. And in the past, she had always been involved in, like the other cases that she'd been involved with, many of them had been about parents who had abused their children but wanted to keep them. And Sabine always came in on the side of the parents. That was just her thing. So when she ran into Ella, we're not quite sure exactly how they met, but she says that they met in the fall of 2014. So it would have been during the time when Ella was in court trying to get the children back from police custody because they'd been taken into protective custody.
Right, they were in foster care for some time.
Yeah, they were in foster care, yeah. And Ella kept basically trying to pump everyone she knew for information and was able to identify foster carers. So they had to keep being switched around from one to the next. That was another.
Oh my gosh, that's terrible.
Which is really so uncaring about the children. If you care about your kids, you want them to be, in a stable situation. You don't want them to be running for their lives all the time.
One of the saddest things that I came across reading through the court cases is they're interviewing the young girl, and she's asking them, "Can I stay with my foster parents till I'm 14?" Like it's just like heartbreaking. Like she didn't even want to go back with this whole mess that she was involved in, and like there was something in the court. They were in court for 6 years. I mean, you talked a little bit about it, but they've been in and out, 7 different judges, 9 hearings. I mean, it's just a whole litany of these dragging these kids around who are, super young. So it can't be good. So Sabine McNeil, but was she known as a McNeil friend?
The term is a Mackenzie friend.
Mackenzie, sorry.
Yeah, that's okay. I don't know if they actually have those in the U.S., but here it's basically a person who is permitted to sit with a litigant in person in court. Now, litigant in person is a fancy word for someone who's representing themselves and doesn't have a lawyer. So she was able to sit with Ella in court and provide, sort of information and stuff. She didn't actually fulfill that role. Her colleague, Belinda Mackenzie, which is nothing to do with the term Mackenzie friend, by the way, it's just coincidental. But her friend Belinda Mackenzie was sort of the official Mackenzie friend. What Sabine was doing was running blogs and doing investigations in the background and kind of being her, private investigator, I guess, and helping her get this, the publication of the videos set up. There was a plan in place from the very beginning to release the videos. There are reasons that we can suspect that might have been the case. We don't 100% know for sure. But it seems as though they were planning to use the videos. Abraham had this bizarre idea. As I said, he had some very strange ideas about the nature of hemp. And one of them was that it could be used to overcome the effects of trauma-based mind control, as he called it. And so he wanted to basically have these children be like his sort of walking testimonial for how kids can get over the effects of trauma-based mind control.
Wow.
And so I believe at the time, their original plan was to release the videos one at a time to get people excited about this idea that these children had been, that had been abused in this way, but that they were recovering and they were doing so well, and it was all because of the miracle of hemp. That's my suspicion at the moment. As I say, it's always a work in progress because we're constantly finding out, new things.
That makes perfect sense because as you and I talked about, I was familiar with the case of the Hampstead, and Abraham and Ella because they were on the Ed Opperman report. So
Yeah.
that was, I believe, late 2015, December 2015, after everything had happened. And during the whole interview, it was so very strange because everything kept being turned towards him. Like Ed is
Yes.
trying to get to the details of the situation, and Ella Draper kind of fell in the background, and Abraham took over, and everything was hemp. And then, after that was published on December 22nd, 2015, in a very rare kind of disclaimer, Ed wrote something on the YouTube and basically said that somebody affiliated, or them themselves, Abraham and Ella, were involved in faking comments on the YouTube channel. And
Really?
yeah, so I'll read the whole disclaimer. Since the original recording of this, and this is Ed Opperman. Since the original recording of this interview, I've come to the conclusion that these guests are far less than credible. In fact, due to their behavior, I chose not to broadcast this interview on the 19 stations that carry the Opperman report or place it into archives on the usual podcast sites that carry the show. I only left up the YouTube recording of the show in order to maintain a record of the interview, not to promote its content or the agenda of the guests. Based upon my observation and analysis of the YouTube analytics, I have concluded that the majority of traffic and comments to this YouTube upload is artificial. I have concluded that it is the guests that are responsible for the majority of views and comments on both sides of the trolling comments.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that doesn't surprise me. Yeah, he would comment with about a gazillion different socks, which is not an uncommon thing for people to do on YouTube. I get accused of it. I only have one YouTube account, which I think makes me like a dinosaur or something.
I have two, so you know, you're a rarity only to have one. Most people have a backup one. And it was, so that was 2015, and I mean, maybe going back after what you mentioned is the Poffley decision on March 19th, which people can read at Karen's website, which is hoaxsteadresearch.wordpress.com. Ella doubled down 2 days later and did a public YouTube statement and just named a whole bunch of names and really implicated people in a very bold manner.
Yes, that's right. And an interesting thing about that, she claimed that the children had given her those names, that basically they had somehow been able to remember the names, addresses, phone numbers, email addresses, workplaces, and the names of the nannies and their email and phone contacts.
Right, very detailed information for an 8 and 9 year old, right?
So where that information actually came from, in school, I don't know if you have children or not, but in school, often there will be like a class mom who kind of takes over organizing things and making sure that everyone has everyone else's phone numbers. So this was one of those lists where every year someone would take charge of getting the names, phone numbers, and so forth, so that if you wanted to arrange a play date with a kid, or if you wanted to, maybe you couldn't make it to school on time and you wanted so-and-so's nanny to pick your child up instead, you could do that. You could contact them and say. So they knew, the parents, as soon as the parents saw these lists, they knew exactly what they were because it contained the same mistakes as the previous year's published lists.
Wow, that's incredible. So the so-called testimony of the kids replicated the exact mistakes of earlier lists. So
that's right.
But the ramifications of her statements were very serious because these were named names, and people actually, the hysteria that still surrounds this case, these people were implicated in something without any corroborating information.
Well, and they had no idea what was going on until February of 2015 either. They didn't know any of this. The police didn't tell them, I think probably because they thought it was just, part of a case and it was not, it was never going to go any further. But once it was out there, the parents had to be brought into a meeting and have it explained to them that this had all happened and that they had been named and their children had been named. Now, some of their children, I have come to know some of the parents over the years that I've been running the blog because I'd get thank you notes and stuff and would respond to those. And so, so I know maybe 6 or 7, I guess, of the parents. So from what they have told me, their kids had begun receiving emails from people proposing to the parents that they set them up for a date with these kids because Abe and Ella had the children claim that these kids liked sex.
Wow, that's crazy. So they had like predators, pedophile predators.
They had predators. Yeah, they
Wow,
were
that's
opening
incredible.
children predators. Yeah,
So
and
irresponsible.
they would be opening their own children to the same sort of predators too. I mean, let's not fool ourselves. This stuff is a pedophile's wet dream basically.
Well, that was an interesting point. Is like this is like like people, like the stories of the kids would attract pedophiles. Yeah, it's crazy. And when Ella made that statement, she wasn't even in the UK. She was in Spain. Like people don't know her whereabouts.
No, that's right.
That was the same thing with Ed Opperman's interview. They called and people didn't even know where they were calling from.
No, they kept. It was all supposed to be a big secret. It's really not very difficult to work out pretty much where they are. But she and Abraham have actually broken up now. They've split up last year sometime. And he's gone off to Morocco to pretend to be a, I don't know, camel driver or something. I don't know. And I'm not actually being racist when I say that. That's actually what he said he's doing.
Wow. But I mean, he was never charged or anything. They want Ella Draper back in, but back into the UK, correct? But they've never returned them back to take a look at these, to assess what they did, the damage they've done.
Yeah, it's a tricky situation. Because the way I look at it, and I don't know for sure whether this is the case, but my concern is that if they bring them back and take them to court, those children are going to have to go into court and testify against their mother. That's the only way they'll get a conviction because the mother could very easily say, none of this is true. My children know that I only had their best interests at heart. They need to testify to show the truth. And that would be really reopening the wound for them. So while on the one hand, I would really like to see Ella come back, and I think that would be, a just and moral thing to happen, I also am concerned that the children might be put on the stand. And that's, that would be a problem.
And they're what? They have to be close to 15 or 16 right now?
12 and 13 now, I believe. Gotcha. Yeah, they were 8 and 9 when the videos were taken.
So this, really set off this firestorm around the internet, but that wasn't when they fled the UK, that wasn't the end. There have been these other cases that involve perverting the courts of justice, where some of this kind of group that surrounded this case, particularly in the UK, and actually somebody here went to jail, somebody from the US, his name was Rupert Quaintance, for American Freedom Radio, which a lot of people who listen to my show are familiar with. But maybe you can talk about this Sabine McNeil, Nilu Berry, and just what happened in court these people really are true believers. What happened in court on July 18th and 11th of 2016?
Yeah, that was the first sort of major trial. There had been other arrests and trials before that. There was a woman named Christine Sands who claims to be the head of Anonymous in the U.S. I don't understand how that works, but anyway. She was arrested for basically causing a disturbance at the church and screaming at parishioners, which is kind of not a nice thing. So she was actually deported back to the U.S. There was another lady named Nilu Berry. She was with Christine at the church and was also screaming at people. She was arrested. That one fell apart because the Crown prosecutor basically messed up and didn't show up at the trial, which was unbelievably stupid. So then the following year, what happened was, as I said, Sabine McNeil, the Mackenzie Friend person, used to run some in the range of between 40 and 60 different blogs. Wow. And she, on one of her blogs, she took the witness statements that had been made about Nilu's episode at the church, and she published them online. And so that meant that the witnesses to this thing felt intimidated and were reluctant to testify because they didn't want to come to court knowing that their personal details, their addresses, their phone numbers, everything about them was already online, and that would be used against them, because people became very, very angry about this thing. And especially the true believers, who unfortunately were pretty much sucked into, I think, believing the whole story. So they felt in danger, and some of them decided not to testify. So Sabine and Nilu were both charged with conspiracy to commit witness intimidation, which it turns out the trial was a complete circus from beginning to end, honestly. There were like fights in the public gallery about who got seating. There were, all sorts of skirmishes in the hall about, I don't know, in the U.S. I think you can take photos in court, but I'm not sure.
You have to have the permission of the judge.
Okay, well, in the UK it's strictly forbidden. Like, you don't even, there's big signs everywhere.
It's very wise. Yeah, very wise. It's not a good idea.
Yeah. So people were taking photographs of each other in the hall, and all sorts of things like that. So, ultimately what wound up happening was that the case broke down over a couple of procedural details that were not visible to the jury. The judge decided that they have a halftime submissions, basically, where the defense can basically say, I don't think this trial should go on any further because X, Y, and Z. And that actually was accepted by the judge. But at the end of the trial, he imposed restraining orders on both Nilu and Sabine.
Right, like 5 years restraining orders?
It was a lifetime restraining order.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah. And neither of them could discuss any of the, and they basically made a list of things that they weren't allowed to discuss, which I can't say because that would be breaching, the court order. But anyhow, they weren't allowed to name certain names and individuals, which of course they went right ahead and did.
Wow.
Anyway.
No, and they were screaming in court, like the circus aspect. Nilu saying that they're responsible for baby stealing, satanic rituals, and baby killing. And then their attorney jumps in and it says the same thing. So it just was pandemonium in that.
Oh, he was screaming at the judge. The judge told him to shut up, and he screamed back, "No, you shut up," which, frankly, I don't think is a wise thing to say to a judge.
Yeah. No, you can go to jail. I mean, I think the judge to Worsley, the guy, said, I should throw you both in jail. But,
yeah. I sort of have this vision of poor old Worsley at the end of that thing, lying on the floor of his office with a cold cloth on his head.
Yeah, probably drinking a big old pint of vodka or something. Who knows? Probably.
Yeah. Oh my God, what the hell was I thinking?
Yeah. So, but I mean, I think it's an aspect of the hysteria that's surrounding this case, is that these people really believed the narrative put out by Draper, Christie, and the children, and have not buried. And the rationale and the way that they thought, and a lot of people surrounding Hampstead think, is that the resistance is evidence of this broader conspiracy. So this is more evidence that they're conspiring against the original story.
Yeah. If you defend yourself, for instance, the fact that I say this probably didn't happen, first of all, means that I'm probably very closely associated with the people who were involved, which is not true. I have met some of them, but I'm not closely associated with them. And secondly, it means that if you respond and say, no, it's not true, that must mean you're guilty. On the other hand, if you don't respond and don't say anything, that also must mean you're guilty.
Right, you're covering it up. You don't want to address it. Right. So the rationales that continue this hysteria, and probably other hysterias involving, true crime cases and things like that, they the story hasn't gone away. It's still prevalent. It's still, and there's still people around today. You talked about this one guy, Nathan Stoltman, of Lifting the Veil. He's still putting out these inquiries into Hampstead and making money off it, his videos. And so, and there's other ones, Alfred Labramont Weber, some other people on YouTube really continuing to to stoke the flames or feed the fire
Yeah,
of the story. Yeah.
yeah, they are. Since Sabine's trials. Sabine got 9 years in prison.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Yeah, she got 9 years. That was a landmark, and the judge's remarks about that were scathing. Basically,
when was this case? This was not the 2016. No, what was it? The 2016.
No, this was in 2018.
2018.
This
Okay.
started it on the 19th of November and finished in mid-December. I think it was at the 18th. I'm not sure of the exact date. And then the sentence came down in January on the 9th.
Gotcha.
Yeah, and it was basically she had been charged with 4 counts of stalking of 4 different families, and then of another 17 counts of violating the restraining order, which had been put down by Justice Poffley. So, sorry, not Justice Poffley. Sorry, of Judge Worsley. Yeah, yeah.
And so, but can you talk a little bit about the scathing statement by the judge that convicted her in 2018?
Oh man, yeah. It was something else. She was basically, I think she was, she said that, she had destroyed the lives of a great number of people, that her, she had basically done it out of ego, because she was, the way they looked at it in the trial was that Sabine was attempting to blackmail a judge, which was exactly what had happened. And the court does not look favorably on that sort of thing.
No. Well, how was she trying to blackmail him?
Well, it was about Mrs. Justice Poffley. What she had said was, what Sabine said to the judge was, you give back the 2 children of Ella's, and we will not release the videos.
Oh, wow.
Now, if you think about that, first of all, it's blackmailing a judge, but it also says that Sabine did not believe that the hoax was real. Because if she believed that the hoax was real, she would have never even thought about withholding the videos, because she would have said, there are all of these hundreds of babies being killed, and there are, small children being sexually abused by hundreds of horrible people with skulls around their waists, and babies being sent in by DHL and all sorts of things.
Right, at McDonald's, at the swimming pool. Yeah.
How would you make a deal to save 2 children for their mother in order, and then allow all of this to continue?
Right, and then allow the other 50, all the other babies that are being shipped in by DHL to continue, right? Good point.
Yeah.
And there are other kind of tells and giveaways with Abraham Christie as well that, they do things that's pretty, why are you running if you're so honest? Why don't you just stay? Where's the corroborating information?
Yeah.
There's all kinds of problems. But
that's right.
Sabine McNeil, I've heard some of her talks, and she is, I don't know if she continued that kind of high-level enervation or hysteria, but the way she talks, she was always...
She's always on the verge of hysteria.
Yeah, of hysteria. She's about to crack, but she holds it on for like an hour. Like there was an interview with her from Germany where I was like, take a deep breath, and it just didn't stop. It was amazing. So...
Yeah. No, that's right. That's right.
But then sorry, please continue.
No, that's okay. When Judge Cahill, she was the judge in Sabine's case, said this has to be one of the most serious cases of stalking and breach of a restraining order that there can be. The direct consequences of your actions are that for the 4 families concerned in counts 1 to 4, you have ruined all normal family life. Their children have been unable to attend school normally and are either homeschooled or have to carry tracking devices and alarms. The families have escape routes planned in case of attack. Mothers have slept on the floors of their children's bedrooms to protect them. They've had to move home. They've had businesses ruined as a result of being unable to have an online profile. And as if that's not bad enough, for the children, they will never, as things stand at the moment, be able to go online and put their own names in without seeing the vile filth that you have peddled over a period of years. Now, that is just the beginning of her statement. It goes on, but that gives you a general sense of what she had warning after warning. She just continued posting anyway on her many, many blogs. And when she couldn't go on her blogs, because she'd basically been put on bail and told that a condition of bail was that she couldn't go on the blogs. Once that happened, she, as they say, kind of went analog and went to a meeting of the Church of England where they were addressing issues of child sexual abuse within the church, and began handing out leaflets to people there to try and get the church in Hampstead investigated, which she had very specifically been told she could not do.
Yeah, so she's in jail probably. I guess Rupert Quaintance just got out. I think he went to jail for.
He was only in for 4.5 months. Which sounds like not that much, but I understand that Wandsworth is a pretty nasty place, and it's one of those sort of very overcrowded prisons. So I can understand that he might have had a rough time there. Unfortunately, he basically worked with Sabine McNeil and a lady named Angela Power Disney who lives in Ireland. And they kind of brought him over to the UK to quote unquote investigate, and filled his head with all sorts of things. And he came over very excited and made threats about drawing blood and kicking down doors and all that sort of thing.
I think he said, "I want to go the violent route. I don't want to kill them. I just want to beat them up all real good, scare them to death." There's pictures of him in front of the church. He was featured in the Mirror UK, so there was a couple articles about him. So he clearly intimidates. So the intimidation of these researchers, so-called researchers, really was real. And those are the ones that are just publicized, because there's other videos online of people standing in front of those churches and screaming at random people. Really worked up. So the hysteria was really long running, and it's still they're still happening today. Just like you talked about, Stoltman is still publishing stuff about.
Stoltman does it because he can make money at it. He gets clicks. They're monetized. His videos are monetized. Some of his stuff is being taken down now, which I'm very happy to see. I believe that YouTube is beginning to take complaints against these things more seriously. As far as I'm aware, at present, there are about 4,500 YouTube videos that either name the father or name the children, or have videos directly of the children. And YouTube was served initially with a court order back in 2015, and they straight out said, we don't have to obey this because there's some loophole that we can get away with not doing it, which makes no sense, really, if you think about it.
No, it doesn't make any sense. It's still around. I mean, Stoltman, I think you published something, I think that was posted on Twitter March 9th, So he's getting videos removed, things like that. But why do you think that? Do you think that Abraham or Ella keyed into, like, they knew or anticipated that their story would really explode to the size that it came? They did.
I think what happened was, originally we thought that they had planned it with Belinda Mackenzie and Sabine McNeil. Given what we learned at the trial, I'm currently actually in the process of revising the Hampstead timeline, because it seems now that the planning was done, but it was not done with those people. It was actually done with a person named Brian Garish, who runs UK Column, which is kind of, I want to say it's kind of like Alex Jones light.
Gotcha. Right. Yeah, there are some suspicions about him, his interest, and why he's involved. But somebody seemed to have known that this would be like setting off like a atomic bomb on the internet, because it really did take off. And I was watching the videos and things like that. It was interesting because when you look at the timeline too, you see that, and one of the things we talked about in the intro is that they just discovered this massive satanic conspiracy involving the dad and all these other people 4 weeks from when the videos were published. So that to me is very telling. Like, there was no hint of all these other court cases and all the other filing in front of the 7 judges, and then all of a sudden this very vivid story pops up. I think that
Yeah, there's no context for it at all. It
yeah.
just kind of came up on the internet. Yeah, and it was billed at the time as these children were, victims of satanic sexual abuse. Now, if it's interesting, I don't recommend going to listen to the videos because A, they're distressing, and B, I think it's an abuse of the children to, that they even exist. But it is interesting that in none of the videos do they ever use the word satanic.
Yeah, good point.
Yeah, they actually, at one point, it's pretty clear that they've been told, someone has told these kids that what they're talking about is a cult. But the little girl kind of goes, this culture. And then she sort of looks a bit confused, like,
right.
Is that the right word?
Right.
But the thing is, if you belong to a cult, any person who has ever belonged to a cult, and you go and look at the literature, they never refer to it as a cult because they don't think it is a cult.
Good
you
point.
have to convince
That's
that it's one.
Point. Well, the other thing is that telling about the interviews and the videos is they're not knowledgeable about sexual behavior at all in those.
No.
There's all kinds of they say they're having it, but the way they talk about it, they clearly they're not describing real events to me. So that was, and they both retracted under. When Abraham wasn't around and I can't remember who was the guy who was interviewing, I thought he was doing a great job, but at a certain point they said, we were told they made it all up, and Abraham was swearing at the girl and all kinds of horrible stuff.
Oh yeah, yeah. No, it's very nasty. One of the things though one of the big things that people get very excited about is the medical report.
Right.
And the doctor who did the medical report is named Deborah Hoax. I don't want to cast any aspersions on her professional qualifications, but I will say that in the judgment, the Poffley judgment, Justice Poffley comes as close as she possibly can to saying you're an idiot.
And Hodes did change her mind, and then she had a meeting with her friends, and, let me update this, and then, let me update my findings. So, and then she described, there's clinical significance as a possible normal variant. So she went from yes, and that is a linchpin that the people who believe that the abuses are happening are, are found.
Well, one thing. Yeah, another thing that doesn't come out in the actual medical report, and that we heard about during the trial, was that Dr. Hodes had a 2-hour consultation with Ella right before she decided to do the second examination.
Wow, that's incredible.
That is not supposed to happen. The doctor is supposed to go in there, see what she sees, come back and report it neutrally, and just and then. Sort of without having any contact with the parent, either parent, who can influence her decision in either way, and that is why she went back to look for a sign, which in fact, what not to get too technical here, but the idea of looking for the sign of reflex anal dilatation, which is called RAD, that is actually a sign that has been discounted in other cases. There was a very famous case in the UK, probably about 20 years ago, I guess, where that was used as a sign of child sexual abuse, and it was used to excuse the mass airlifting, I guess, of children out of their homes where they had never been abused, and they later went on to sue the people who had taken them out because they said nothing had ever happened to them, and they'd been subjected to all sorts of horrible experiences because the doctor was convinced that RAD was a thing.
That was happening. Gotcha. And I think that there was something in the case files where it said, there's variance in different tests. It didn't seem like it was 100% right. So and so. Yeah, you see this kind of culture of hysteria around Hampstead still continuing to this day. What do you anticipate, for the future of Hampstead? Will it just go away? Will people still reference it?
I think it's going to be one of those things that kind of lingers on the periphery, if you like. I don't think it's ever going to completely go away, unfortunately. I think that there's too much out there and too many people kind of coming across old bits of hysterical reporting and going like, oh my God,
Right.
you know. And it's the internet. It's very hard to erase anything from the internet.
That's a good point.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's one of the reasons that I keep writing the blog, and that is basically to show that more information keeps coming in about this case, and there needs to be some place online that says, this is bullshit, people, you're being snowed, you know?
By the original people, yeah. It's really a remarkable event. I mean, it's one of those things that'll go down in recent internet kind of alternate media as one of the more interesting hoaxes that people have latched onto and really looked into. I think that if they know the context, if they know the custody context, they've been in and out of court, that the mothers and possibly could lose custody. You see the rationale and how her relationship with Abraham facilitated this story, and how he may have even dominated her with his kind of sensibilities, so to speak. That but the stories themselves are way too lurid and they're not factual. And so that's really the problem. Yeah. Exactly. I mean, they said there were 800 victims. I mean, if you look at this, like one of the statements, so are you going to pick and choose the statements of the kids? I mean, it said, like, what did they say? How many skulls do you wear when she's dancing? 20. So how many adults are involved then? 400 plus. 450. How many skulls do 20? Do the math, and I mean, it's just like, come on. You're saying that the entire city of Hampstead is just one big satanic cult? It's, it's hard to... Yeah. That's hard. Without any other thing.
There were so many things, like, for instance, that they were storing the skulls in the church in shallow drawers. First of all, skulls don't fit in shallow drawers, even if they're baby skulls. Like, it's just ridiculous, some of the stuff. The math just doesn't work out. Yeah. The other thing is that there was actually, we were talking about Stoltman a little while ago. Mm-hmm. He actually did a live interview with Ella, and he reported that she said that for background, she had accused her first husband and her first son, her oldest son, who was from the first husband, of having been participants in this cult. Right. She told Stoltman later, like in 2017, I guess it was, that she'd been mistaken about this, except that she'd had the children say it. So it's on the videos where the children basically talk about their stepbrother or half brother rather, and his dad having been involved in this cult, and Abraham talks about it in the Jean Clement tapes. So it's one or the other.
She's inconsistent. Right. Yeah.
She's inconsistent, and it's clear that she had them make this up. She basically got them to say something that was not true.
Was she trying to get the custody of the other? When did the custodial rights vacate for children in the UK? Do you know? Is it 16, 18? When are they emancipated? Or
that is a very good question. I believe it would be 18, but I don't know. I know that the older son was past the age of emancipation. He was over 18 when she named him.
Gotcha. And that's how she got the last name Draper. That came from her first husband.
That's right. That's for her original name was Gariva. Yeah.
Gariva, right. Karen, is there anything that you'd like to add, or anything that we missed that you'd like to impart, as well as just restating your blog again?
Yeah. Basically, just that I find it disturbing that people are so willing and, in fact, eager to believe this, and upset when they find out that it's not true. If I were to find out that children weren't being abused, I would be overjoyed.
Right.
And yet when you tell people this, they become enraged. How could you say such a thing? It means you don't believe anyone. It's like, no, I believe children were abused. I used to work with them, for God's sake.
I mean, that's a sad tale too, because kids are being abused.
They are.
She just sucked up all this court time that could have been used for real cases.
Time. Yeah, court time, court money, and the other thing is that it affects the lives of other victims, because it affects their credibility. You know, the more people make up stupid stories about having been sexually abused by like aliens or whatever, or you know, Satanists, or I don't know, all of this nonsense, the more they make this stuff up, the less credibility other real victims have, and that puts them in a bad position. You know, it's like false allegations make things terrible for everyone.
Right. It's. I mean, you can look at the current events at Jussie Smollett. He made up these fake allegations that affect everybody else who wants to make real allegations. Right.
Exactly. Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. And it just makes people brush them aside and go like, oh, that's not real. You're just a wannabe. Right. But there are people really suffering out there. There are children really suffering out there, and they need to be helped and dealt with. You know.
That's a great way to end it. So it's Karen. Your blog again is Hoaxstead Research. It's HOAXTEAD RESEARCH at WordPress.com. People go check it out. It has tons of information right from the beginning of the case to the present. Look at the court cases. Look at the Poffrey decision. Look at it all in context. And you also have you also wrote out all the things we talked about. The Jean Clement audio is there too, and I would recommend people check that out as well. So very important. Karen, thank you so much for the interview.
You're so welcome. Thank you.
Okay, I'm going to stop that.